This is Mr. Harold, an old man with hands that never seemed to stay still. Each brush stroke he tried to make trembled, each attempt at a line looked broken. His grandchildren watched him from the corner of the room, giggling, whispering, rolling their eyes. "Grandpa, you should stop," one of them muttered, too loud for him not to hear. "Your hands shake too much. Painting isn't for you anymore." Their laughter stung more than the stiffness in his joints. The brush slipped from his fingers and tapped against the canvas, leaving an accidental streak across a half-finished flower. He sat silently, his lips pressed tight, while the sound of amusement filled the room. In that moment, Harold wasn't just an old man with shaky hands. He was a man being told he had no place left in the world of creation. A man being dismissed as useless. But the truth was buried in silence. What they didn't know was that Harold had painted long before their parents were even born. That hidden in his attic was a canvas, older than them all, wrapped carefully, untouched by ridicule. And one day, that very canvas would hang inside a grand museum under brilliant lights, while the world gasped at his masterpiece. But the question remains, if your own family mocked your passion, would you forgive them? Or would you let the truth speak louder than their scorn? The sun filtered through the sheer curtains of Harold's modest home, casting thin stripes of gold across the wooden floor. The house itself was a relic of another time, filled with memories that clung to every creak of the floorboards and every fading photograph on the walls. The scent of old varnish and turpentine lingered faintly in the air, a reminder of the countless afternoons Harold had spent in this very room, brush in hand, heart quietly ablaze with colors only he could see. His small studio was tucked into the back corner of the house. It wasn't too much just a narrow room with a cracked window and shelves sagging under the weight of paints, brushes, and stacks of forgotten canvases. A faint layer of dust coated the jars of pigments, and the wooden easel bore the marks of decades, its legs stained with streaks of blues and reds from long-ago masterpieces. On the table by the window sat Harold himself, hunched over but dignified, his silver hair catching the morning light. His hands trembled as he gripped the brush, but his eyes, those weary yet determined eyes, still carried the spark of the young artist he once was. To him, the world outside was shrinking his steps slower, his voice softer, his role in the family diminished. Yet within the four walls of this studio, he was more than a fragile old man. He was a creator, a keeper of visions that refused to fade. The laughter of children echoed faintly from the living room. His grandchildren were sprawled on the couch, tapping away at glowing screens, throwing quick glances toward the old man as though he were a curiosity. Behind their laughter lay a cruel indifference, the kind that doesn't need sharp words to wound. Every time Harold raised his trembling hand, their smirks grew wider, as if his persistence was nothing more than entertainment. The house carried the weight of time. In the hallway, family portraits lined the wall. His children and grandchildren smiled in polished frames. But there was no space left for Harold's own achievements. The one painting he had been most proud of, a landscape he had poured his youth into, wasn't displayed anywhere here. It was hidden in the attic, wrapped carefully in old linen, waiting for a day that Harold himself wasn't sure would ever come. Even the smallest details betrayed the slow passage of years. The worn carpet beneath his feet, the ticking of the old clock with its uneven rhythm, the faint scent of linseed oil from paints he could no longer afford to buy fresh. All of it painted a picture of a man caught between past glory and present invisibility. And yet, there was dignity in his silence. Each stroke he made, no matter how shaky, carried the weight of decades of passion. Each canvas he touched became a quiet protest against the way his family looked at him. He wasn't painting to impress them anymore. He was painting because it was the only way to keep his soul alive. From the outside, it looked like weakness. But for Harold, the studio was a battlefield, and his trembling hands were soldiers refusing to surrender. Dinner at Harold's house should have been warm, a gathering of generations under one roof. The table was set with simple dishes: roast chicken, steamed vegetables, a basket of bread still warm from the oven. Harold sat at the head of the table, a place once reserved for respect, but now it felt like a throne stripped of its crown. His son, Robert, carried the conversation with a booming voice, speaking about business, real estate, and how the market isn't what it used to be. His daughter-in-law, Elaine, nodded with practiced politeness, slipping in her remarks about how expensive everything had become. The grandchildren barely looked, up from their phones, their screens glowing in the dim light of the dining room chandelier. It wasn't the words themselves that cut Harold, but the tone dismissive, impatient, as though his presence was more obligation than joy. When he tried to speak, his voice cracked slightly, and the conversation rolled over him like a wave, drowning his words before they reached the surface. Then it happened. Robert's eyes fell on the faint streaks of paint clinging stubbornly to Harold's fingertips. "Dad, you're still messing around with those paints?" he asked, his tone half amusement, half reprimand. "At your age, you should be resting, not wasting time on that." Elaine's laugh followed quickly, the kind of laugh that hides mockery behind a veil of lightness. "Oh, I saw him in the studio earlier," she said, shaking her head. His hands were shaking so much I thought he was going to spill paint all over the floor. "Honestly, Harold, you should stop before you ruin your clothes or the house." The grandchildren perked up at this, their attention drawn away from their screens. "Grandpa paints?" the eldest one asked, her eyebrows raised with disbelief. "But how? Doesn't the brush just fall out of your hands?" the others snickered, covering their mouths but not their laughter. Harold lowered his gaze to the plate before him. The roast chicken, once so appetizing, had lost all flavor. His fork trembled in his hand, though this time not from age, but from the sting of humiliation. "I paint because I want to," he said softly, almost to himself. But Robert only sighed. "Dad, no one's saying you can't keep yourself busy. Just be realistic. Painting takes precision and you don't have that anymore. It's time to let it go." The words hung in the air like a verdict. Harold felt the weight of them pressing down on his chest. Let it go, as if decades of passion, years of sacrifice, and the countless hours he had poured into canvas and color were nothing more than a hobby for children, something to be discarded once shaky hands made it inconvenient. His mind flashed back to another time, another table. Long ago, his wife, Margaret, had sat beside him, her eyes full of encouragement, her voice gentle, but firm as she told him never to abandon his art. She had believed in him when no one else did. But she was gone now, and her voice was just an echo he carried in silence. The clinking of cutlery filled the void his silence left behind. The family carried on with their meal, the conversation moving to vacations, promotions, and school exams. No one noticed the storm brewing quietly behind Harold's calm expression. He excused himself early, retreating to the sanctuary of his studio. There, surrounded by the smell of paint and the half-finished canvas on the easel, he let the anger rise in him. Not wild, not loud, but steady, simmering like fire hidden beneath ashes. Each stroke he laid on the canvas that night was heavier, darker. His hands shook, yes, but his will did not. The ridicule of his family, their laughter at his trembling hands, it only deepened his resolve. They thought he was finished. They thought his art had no place in the world anymore, but Harold knew something they didn't. The masterpiece he had painted in his youth, the one that lay wrapped in linen in the attic, had never been forgotten. It had simply been waiting for the day it would speak louder than any cruel word, louder than the mocking laughter of children who didn't understand, louder than the dismissive sighs of his son. For now, Harold stayed silent, but silence did not mean surrender. The attic was a kingdom of dust and forgotten years. Whenever Harold climbed the narrow wooden steps, the groan of each board beneath his weight carried him deeper into memory. Boxes filled with yellowing letters, brittle photographs, and broken toys stood like silent witnesses to a lifetime of moments that his family no longer cared to remember. But for Harold, every object held a story, a reminder of the man he used to be. He remembered when painting had been more than a pastime. In his 20s, Harold had been relentless. He studied color the way some studied scripture, rising before dawn to catch the shifting tones of sunrise, staying awake until midnight to perfect the glow of lamplight on glass. His early works had caught the attention of a few small galleries. Even a local critic who once wrote, "Young Harold paints not with his hands, but with his soul." But then came marriage, children, responsibility. Margaret, his beloved wife, supported him wholeheartedly. Yet, He knew the weight of bills and school fees pressed heavily on her too. So, Harold set aside his rising career, shelving exhibitions in favor of a steady job at the factory. The paints dried, the brushes stiffened, and the canvases were tucked away, waiting. He told himself it was only temporary, that once his children were grown, he would return. But years blurred into decades and duty became routine. Sacrifices piled up like layers of dust. He missed opportunities others would have seized. A chance to study in Paris, an offer to display his work in New York, a scholarship he had earned but declined because the timing wasn't right. At the time, he told himself it didn't matter. Family came first. But what he hadn't expected was how quickly family could forget. When Margaret passed away, Harold had returned to his art, hoping to find comfort in the colors. Yet instead of encouragement, he was met with impatience. His children saw painting as a distraction, a waste of hours that could be better spent resting. They treated his art as though it was some fragile hobby for an old man, not the passion that had once defined his life. And so, little by little, their words etched themselves into his heart. He grew used to their sighs when they saw the paint stains on his shirt, the rolled eyes when he asked for more brushes as birthday gifts, the laughter when they saw his shaky hand try to steady a brush. These were not isolated moments, but a chorus of dismissal that had lasted years. Still, Harold endured. In the attic, he kept his greatest secret wrapped in linen, the masterpiece he had painted in his youth, long before his hands began to tremble, when every stroke carried the fire of a dreamer unbroken by time. He had never shown it to anyone. Perhaps he had been afraid they would not understand, or perhaps he had known deep down that the world would only see its worth when he was gone. But fate had a different plan. The years of silence, the ridicule, the sacrifices, they had not erased Harold's art. They had only sharpened the contrast between what his family believed and what the truth would one day reveal. And when that day came, the very people who mocked him would be forced to look at him with new eyes. It began with a letter one Harold almost mistook for junk mail. The envelope was cream-colored, thicker than the usual bills that cluttered his table, with an embossed seal in the corner, the National Museum of Art. At first, his hands trembled too much to tear it open. He thought perhaps it was a mistake, a mailing error, some advertisement disguised in fine stationery. But when he finally slid a letter opener beneath the flap, his heart stilled. Inside, the words spoke directly to him. "We have recently come across records of your early work from the archives of the Hudson Gallery. We are curating an exhibition on under-recognized American artists of the 20th century, and we would be honored if you could share any surviving pieces of your early career. Your 1960 to canvas, The Silent Meadow, has been described in critical notes as a masterwork deserving wider recognition." For a long moment, Harold simply stared at the letter. The room around him blurred, and the sounds of his house, the ticking clock, the distant chatter of his grandchildren faded into silence. Someone remembered. Someone outside. These walls, someone who had never mocked him, knew his name. His mind went to the attic, to the canvas he had hidden for decades, wrapped carefully in linen, untouched yet preserved. The Silent Meadow. He whispered the title aloud, and it sounded both foreign and familiar, like greeting an old friend after years apart. That night, Harold climbed into the attic. The bulb flickered weakly, casting long shadows on the boxes piled high. Dust rose with every step, clinging to his skin, but he hardly noticed. His fingers reached for the canvas, the weight of it both literal and symbolic. As he unwrapped the linen, the colors emerged, faded slightly with age, but still radiant, still alive. The meadow stretched across the canvas, painted in the bold yet tender strokes of a young man unafraid of the world. The grass rippled under an imagined wind, the light kissed the horizon in hues of gold and lavender. It was as though the years between then and now dissolved, and Harold was once again that young artist, his soul burning bright. A tear slipped down his cheek, but it wasn't from sadness. It was the realization that his life's work had not been in vain. That even if his family dismissed him, even if his hands betrayed him now, the truth of who he was lived on in this canvas. For the first time in years, Harold felt hope. The museum's interest wasn't merely about art. It was a chance to reclaim his dignity, to remind the world and perhaps his own family that age did not erase worth. He placed the letter back into its envelope, his grip steady now, as though the weight of mockery had finally begun to lift. Tomorrow, he would write back. Tomorrow, he would say yes. The tide had shifted. The silence of decades was about to be broken, and Harold would no longer be the old man with shaky hands in the corner of a room. He would be an artist once more. The gallery lights were unlike anything Harold had ever imagined. They blazed down in perfect symmetry, casting a white glow that made the colors on each canvas leap to life. The National Museum of Art was alive that evening with voices, critics, collectors, students, tourists moving like currents around the exhibits. The air smelled faintly of polished wood and fresh paint, as though the building itself held its breath, waiting. In the center hall, surrounded by works from artists long forgotten or finally remembered, hung the silent meadow. Harold stood several paces back, his heart pounding against his ribs, his cane tapping softly on the marble floor. The canvas he had hidden for nearly 60 years now stood taller than him, framed in gold, elevated under lights that made the painted horizon shimmer like it was alive. The murmurs began almost instantly. A group of critics in tailored suits leaned closer, whispering with a kind of reverence. Students paused in their sketching, eyes wide, hands hovering over notebooks. A woman lifted her phone, snapping photos, while her companion shook his head and muttered, "How could this piece have been hidden so long?" And then came his family. Robert, Elaine, and the children trailed into the hall, their steps unsure, their voices subdued. They had come out of obligation more than pride, assuming this was some small indulgence, a token display. But as they drew nearer and saw the silent meadow, their expressions shifted. Robert's mouth parted slightly as though words had been stolen from him. Elaine clutched her purse tighter, her face caught between disbelief and discomfort. The grandchildren, those same children who had laughed at his trembling hands, stood still for the first time, their eyes fixed on the vibrant sweep of green and gold across the canvas. This is Grandpa's," the youngest whispered. A nearby curator overheard. "Yes," she said with a proud smile, "this is the work of Harold Whitmore, painted in 1962, now recognized as one of the most evocative landscapes of its time." The words struck the family harder than any reprimand could. Around them, the crowd grew thicker. A journalist raised his camera, capturing Harold standing before his masterpiece. Applause broke out in scattered bursts, then swelled into something louder, fuller, echoing against the marble walls. Harold felt the weight of decades lift from his shoulders. His hands still shook, but not from weakness, from the rush of emotion, from the sheer power of being seen. He leaned on his cane and took a careful step forward. For a brief moment, all eyes were on him. A young critic approached with genuine, "Sir, your use of light here, it's extraordinary. How did you capture such warmth, such depth?" Harold's voice, though quiet, carried through the room. "I painted it before I knew what it meant to lose things," he said, "when I still believed the world was mine to hold." The words lingered and silence followed, the kind of silence born not of dismissal but of respect. Behind him, Robert finally spoke, his voice hushed. "Dad, I didn't know." Harold turned, his gaze steady, his expression unreadable. For once, he did not have to explain himself. The painting spoke louder than any defense he could have made, louder than all the nights he had sat alone in his studio while their laughter rang through the house. The applause rose again, filling the hall. Cameras flashed. The family, once so dismissive, now stood surrounded by strangers who revered the man they had ridiculed. And Harold, though frail, stood taller than he had in years. In that moment, the old man with shaky hands was gone. Before them stood the artist, the visionary, the master whose silence had finally broken into brilliance. The truth was no longer hidden, it was framed in gold, displayed for the world, undeniable and eternal. The hall quieted as the curator invited Harold to say a few words. A microphone was placed in his hand, and for a heartbeat, everyone wondered if the tremor in his fingers would silence him. But when he spoke, his voice was steady, measured, the voice of a man who had carried truth longer than most of them had been alive. "I was told," he began, his eyes sweeping the room, "that these hands were too weak, too shaky to create anything worth remembering. But art is not in the hands, it is here. He pressed his palm against his chest. It is carried in the heart, and it waits for as long as it must until the world is ready to see it. The audience erupted in applause, but Harold's gaze shifted deliberately to where Robert and Elaine stood, stiff and pale under the lights. His words were not cruel, yet they cut deeper than any rebuke. You see, age is not a weakness. It is a witness, and truth outlives every careless laugh, every dismissive word. The crowd cheered again, but this time, the family did not move. Robert's head bowed, shame written clearly across his face. Elaine's eyes glistened, though with what regret or guilt no one could say. The grandchildren, silent for once, looked at their grandfather not as a burden, but as something they could barely understand. A man who had held greatness all along. Harold did not raise his voice, did not seek to punish them. His calm was sharper than anger, his dignity heavier than revenge. In that quiet strength, his family saw what they had ignored for years, and for the first time they felt small. When the evening drew to a close, the museum lights dimmed slightly, and the crowd began to thin. Yet the silent meadow still glowed under its spotlight, commanding reverence from those who lingered. Harold stood quietly before it, his cane resting at his side, his reflection faintly mirrored in the protective glass. His family approached slowly, hesitant, as if unsure whether they had the right to stand beside him. Robert finally whispered, "Dad, I'm sorry. We should have believed in you." His voice trembled now where Harold's did not. Elaine remained silent, her eyes lowered while the grandchildren shuffled uncomfortably, no laughter left in them. Harold did not scold, nor did he embrace them. He simply let the silence stretch, a silence heavier than reproach. For once, they carried the weight, not him. The curator adjusted the plaque beneath the painting, polishing the small engraved letters, Harold Whitmore, The Silent Meadow, 1962. The name gleamed under the light, no longer hidden, no longer dismissed. Harold breathed deeply, the air rich with the scent of paint and polished wood. And for the first time in decades, he felt whole. Greatness, he thought, is not in being seen too soon. It is in enduring long enough to be seen when it matters most. If this story moved you, if you believe that truth always finds a way no matter how long it takes, then let Harold's journey remind us all that age is not weakness, but wisdom. Like, share, and subscribe for more stories like this, where hidden lives and forgotten sacrifices return to the light. Join us and together we'll uncover more family secrets, more dramatic twists, and more truths that cannot be silenced. Because sometimes the masterpiece isn't lost, it's simply waiting to be seen.